For each of the following situations, complete the missing information in the table below. So what we can see is we've got some GST collected and charged to customers in the first column, which is this one here. We've got GST paid or charged by suppliers here. Should that be a GST refund or liability? And the amount of that refund or liability. So to answer this, what we need to remember is how GST works. So basically it works so that when a business collects more GST than it pays, it is actually going to have a GST liability. So for example, and the analogy we use is a big tub of liabilities here, and we can also express it as the ledger, and it's always classified as a liability, even though sometimes it might be an asset. So what we've got as an example is, let's say we collected $300 of GST, but we only paid $150. The GST clearing would be a liability of $150, so the pot would go up here and the liability would be $150, and it would be a credit in the ledger, which we call a GST liability. The opposite would be when GST collected is less than the amount of GST paid. The business actually has a GST asset. The business or the government says, well, you actually collected $150, but you've already paid $250, so really the business is entitled to get $100 back as a refund from the government. And what we say is it's kind of like a negative liability. It actually makes the pot go underneath and goes down as a negative, but as a ledger it's just a debit instead of a credit, and we say that is a GST refund. So based on that knowledge, we can now go and fill in our table. So we've got the first column showing the GST collected or charged. We've got the GST paid. So looking at the first one, we collected $950 and only paid $760. So we're going to have a liability because we've collected more than we've paid, and we'll end up owing the difference between those two figures, which is $1,190. Looking at B, we collected and charged $790, but it looks like we've paid way more than that. We're actually going to get that money back. That is a GST refund, and the business will get $700 back from the government. The next one's a little tricky. We're told that there is a collection of GST of $800. We know the firm has a liability at the end of it of $320. So what that must mean is if there's going to be a GST liability, the business must have collected more GST than it's paid. So this number here has to be smaller. How much smaller? Well, it's got to be $320 smaller. So to summarize, collected $800, paid $480 in GST. That means the business owes the government a GST liability of $320. Looking at the next one, we're told we paid or got charged $1,000 in GST. We're going to end up with a refund of $430, and we've got to figure out the GST collected. What that means is we know that because we're going to get a refund, must have paid more GST than we collected. So this number needs to be smaller than this number. So we're going to set that to $570, which is just $1,000 less 430, must mean the business collected $570 of GST, paid $1,000 in GST, so we'll get a refund back of $430. The next one, we're going to get a refund back of $200 based on collections of $540, so that must mean we paid $740. And lastly, we've got a $520 of GST paid. We're going to end up with a liability of $700, and that must mean that's because we've collected $1,220 in GST, ending up with a liability of $700 to the government.